Moles. Now they're good things, moles. Everyone gets a bit panicked about moles, but they're not that bad, honestly. A mole is the same as using something like the word a dozen. So if you had 12 eggs, you'd have a dozen eggs. If you had this many atoms, you'd call it a mole. So if you had this many eggs, you'd call it a dozen. If you had this many atoms, you'd call it a mole. And the mass of that mole is equal to the mass number in grams. So let's have a look at hydrogen. If you had 1 mole of hydrogen, so imagine the scene, you've got 1 mole of hydrogen, it would equal this many atoms of hydrogen. Okay, always the same. If I had 1 mole of magnesium, it'd be that many atoms. And they won't ask you to remember that there. Okay, so what else could you tell me about it? Well, if I had 1 mole of hydrogen, I'd have that many atoms. And the mass of that many atoms would be equal to the top number of hydrogen, the mass number. If I look it up, and I will do just because, even though I know it's 1. So 1 gram. So 1 mole of hydrogen has a mass of 1 gram. 1 mole of nitrogen has a mass of 14 grams because that's the top number. Has the same number of atoms, that big one there that I'm not going to attempt to say, but it weighs differently. It's like the same, say, a dozen eggs is going to weigh differently to a dozen feathers, isn't it? But they're still a dozen. So if I looked at this one, this is a molecular, a bigger one, not just an atom, H2O. If I looked up the MR, that's the mass numbers added together. So 2 hydrogens, so that's 2 times 1, because that's the top number. And O, that's 16, because that's the top number, is 18. So 1 mole of water weighs 18 grams. There you go. Fabulous. So what is the mass of 2 moles of magnesium? So if I look up magnesium, hang on, let's get my pen going. 2 moles of magnesium, let's have a look. So I've got magnesium, it has a mass number of 24, so it'll be 24 times 2, because there's 2 moles, so that equals 48 grams. Right, there you go, 48 grams. Okie dokie. So this is the equation the higher tier people need to use. Don't panic about it, because it is exactly what you've just done, for common sense really. So you just got to rearrange it. So you just did that really, because you had the mass of 2 moles of magnesium. So you had the number of moles. You looked up the MR in the periodic table and times them together. So you have used this equation already. So let's have a look at these two. If I had 0.25 moles of carbon dioxide, so if I put 0.25 here, moles of CO2, what would the mass be? So I need to look at the MR on the periodic table. Carbon's 12, oxygen's 16. So that will be 16 plus 12 plus 16. So it's 44. So the MR is 44. And then, because they're down at the bottom, I times them together. 44 times 0.25. So the answer would be 11 grams. Here's the next one. Oh, hang on, let's just rub this out. Marvellous. If I add 3.2 grams, that's 3.2 grams of an unknown gas, and that's equal to 0.1 moles, what would the MR be? You've got this one, you got this one, do that divided by that, and that will tell you the answer. 3.2 divided by 0.1. The answer there, 32, is the MR. So endeth moles. Marvellous.